A son can tell his father no and still keep the fifth commandment. Another son can obey almost everything his parents ask and still misunderstand what God meant by honor. That sounds contradictory until you look closely at the Hebrew behind the command. The word God chose is not mainly a word about compliance. It carries the idea of weight, and once you see that, a harder question appears. How much weight should your parents actually have in your life? Too little, and they become disposable. Too much, and you may give them authority they were never meant to carry. So where is the line between dishonor, obedience, and genuine biblical honor? That question matters because we may have made the fifth commandment much smaller than it originally was. Honor your father and your mother. For many people, that sentence belongs to childhood. You heard it when you talked back. You heard it when you refused to clean your room. You heard it when your parents told you to do something and you wanted to argue. So almost without noticing, many of us learn to translate the command this way: good children obey their parents. And certainly, Scripture does teach children to obey their parents. But the fifth commandment itself was not delivered to a room full of 8-year-olds. It was spoken into the covenant life of Israel. Look at the commandments around it. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. Do not steal. Do not give false testimony against your neighbor. Do not covet your neighbor's house. These commands assume people with adult responsibilities, adult relationships, property, households, disputes, and the ability to make decisions with serious consequences. So when the command about father and mother appears in the middle of that list, there is good reason to hear it as more than a lesson in childhood manners. It reaches adults too. And that changes everything. Because honoring your parents is relatively easy to imagine when you are 10. But what happens when you are 40? What happens when you have your own marriage, your own children, your own home, your own convictions? What happens when your father gives advice you believe is wrong? What happens when your mother wants a level of influence over your family that you can no longer give her? What happens when the people who once made decisions for you become the people who need you to make decisions for them? Suddenly, honor your father and your mother becomes far more complicated than do what mom says. And this may be one reason the commandment becomes harder as we grow older. As children, the question is often, will I obey? As adults, the question becomes, what place do these two people still have in my life? That is where the Hebrew begins to help. The verb used in Exodus 20:12 is kabed, from the Hebrew root kabi. That root carries ideas connected with heaviness, weight, and significance. Depending on the context, it can describe something physically heavy or something substantial, important, and worthy of honor. So when God commands Israel to honor father and mother, the picture underneath our English word is more concrete than simple politeness. It is weight. Your father is not supposed to become nothing to you. Your mother is not supposed to become insignificant. Their existence is meant to count. Their words should not automatically be dismissed. Their dignity should matter. Their needs should matter. Their place in your story should matter. But notice what the command does not say. It does not say that your parents receive every ounce of weight in the room. And that distinction is crucial. Weight is not the same thing as control. Paul makes an important distinction in Ephesians chapter 6. He tells children to obey their parents in the Lord. Then he points back to the older command to honor father and mother. Those ideas overlap, especially while a child is living under parental authority. But they are not identical. Obedience belongs to a particular relationship with authority. Honor reaches deeper than that. And adulthood changes the structure of a family. Genesis describes a man leaving father and mother and forming a new union with his wife. A new household begins. That does not erase father and mother. But it does mean they no longer occupy exactly the same position they occupied when their son or daughter was a child. Imagine your parents tell you that you should move back to your hometown. They miss you. They believe the family should live close together. They have reasons that make sense to them. You listen. You ask questions. You take their concerns seriously. You consider what they have learned through decades of life. Maybe their words even cause you to reconsider plans you thought were already settled. That is weight. But after prayer, careful thought, and responsibility for the household you now lead, you may still decide that moving back is not the right choice. And you may say, I understand why this matters to you. I have taken what you said seriously, but I believe our family needs to stay where we are. That can be disagreement without contempt. Or imagine your mother has strong opinions about how you should raise your children. Honoring her does not require pretending she has no wisdom, but neither does it require handing her the responsibility that belongs to you as a parent. A parent can have a voice without having the final voice. That may be one of the most important distinctions in this entire commandment, because there are two ways to get the weight wrong. You can make your parents too light, or you can make them too heavy. Biblical honor lives somewhere between those two extremes. And before we talk about what happens when parents are given too much weight, we need to understand the first danger. Because making someone weightless is often much quieter than open rebellion. Most dishonor does not begin with shouting. Sometimes it begins with an eye roll, a sigh when the phone rings, a joke you tell every time your father's name comes up, a decision that is already settled before your mother finishes speaking because, in your mind, nothing she says could possibly matter. Hebrew gives us another useful image. The root kull can carry the idea of lightness, slightness, or being treated with contempt. There is a striking example in Genesis. After Hagar becomes pregnant, Sarai is described as becoming despised in Hagar's eyes. The Hebrew uses this language of lightness. Sarai had not physically changed. Her position had not disappeared overnight. But in Hagar's perception, she no longer carried the same weight. That gives us a picture of something that can happen inside a family without anyone announcing it. A parent can slowly become light in our eyes, not because we screamed at them, not because we openly rejected them, but because we stopped treating them as substantial. Picture a family sitting around a table. The mother is elderly now. She moves more slowly than she used to. Her children are discussing what should happen next, where she should live, whether she should still drive, who should help with her finances. And then something subtle happens. They begin talking about her as though she is not sitting 3 feet away. She can't handle that anymore. She doesn't understand these things. We'll decide what's best. Every statement might contain some truth. There may genuinely be decisions she can no longer manage alone. But there is still a difference between helping a person and erasing a person. She is still in the room. She still has a name. She still has fears, preferences, memories, dignity. And honor asks whether those things still carry weight when efficiency would be easier. That is where this commandment becomes uncomfortable. Because contempt is not always dramatic. Sometimes it is simply the gradual removal of weight. You can hear it in speech. How do you describe your parents when they are not present? There is nothing wrong with admitting that a relationship is difficult. There is nothing dishonorable about telling the truth. Some family wounds must be spoken about honestly. But honesty and contempt are not the same thing. One tells the truth about a flawed human being. The other slowly turns that human being into a caricature. So perhaps there is a simple question worth asking. After I finish talking about my father or mother, have I helped the listener see a real human being? Or have I reduced that person to the worst thing about them? Because if honor means giving proper weight, dishonor can begin long before open rebellion. It begins whenever someone who should still count is treated as though they weigh nothing. But that is only one side of the scale. The commandment can also be distorted in the opposite direction. A parent can be given so much weight that honoring them begins to look like surrendering your conscience, your marriage, your adulthood, or even your obedience to God. And that raises a harder question. Can you refuse your parents and still honor them? Scripture gives us a remarkable picture of that tension in the relationship between Jonathan and his father Saul. Jonathan was the son of the king. Saul wanted David dead. This was not a minor disagreement between a father and son. Saul's hostility toward David had become dangerous, and Jonathan eventually found himself forced to choose between carrying out his father's wishes and doing what he believed was right. Jonathan chose to protect David. He warned him. He defended him. When Saul demanded an explanation, Jonathan challenged his father's decision. Saul became so furious that he hurled a spear at his own son. Now think carefully about what Jonathan did. He did not obey Saul's demand. He did not pretend his father was right simply because he was his father. He refused to participate in something he believed was wrong. And yet the story never requires Jonathan to erase the fact that Saul is still his father. He could resist Saul's will without making Saul's humanity disappear. That is very different from the two extremes we often imagine. One extreme says, if I honor my parents, I must do whatever they want. The other says, if they are wrong, then I owe them nothing. Biblical honor fits neither one. A parent can carry weight without carrying the final weight. Your father may deserve serious consideration without possessing your conscience. Your mother may deserve a respectful hearing without owning your marriage. Their wisdom may influence you without determining every decision you make. And once you become responsible for a household of your own, there are choices you cannot outsource back to your parents simply to avoid disappointing them. This is where the image of a scale becomes useful. On one side is contempt. Your parents weigh nothing. Their words are dismissed before they are spoken. Their needs are merely inconvenient. Their dignity is irrelevant. But on the other side is another distortion. Your parents become so heavy that every decision bends beneath them. Your marriage is organized around their approval. Your calling is measured by their expectations. Your conscience is silenced whenever they disagree. And eventually, the weight given to father or mother begins occupying a place that belongs to God. That is not what the fifth commandment asks. Jesus made the order of loyalty clear. Family matters deeply, but family does not sit at the highest point. God does. So sometimes honor may sound like, Dad, I have listened carefully, but I cannot do what you are asking. Sometimes it may sound like, Mom, I love you, but this decision belongs to my spouse and me. And sometimes it may require a simple no. The question is not merely whether you said yes or no. The deeper question is, what weight did you give the person while you answered? Did you listen before refusing? Did you tell the truth without humiliating them? Did you disagree with their judgment, or did you attack their worth? Respect can survive disagreement because influence and authority are not the same thing. That is proper weight. But now we have to go somewhere more difficult, because disagreements about careers, money, or family decisions are one thing. What if the relationship itself has been deeply harmful? For some people, honor your father and mother brings back warm memories. For others, that sentence lands on an old wound. Maybe your father was frightening. Maybe your mother manipulated every relationship around her. Maybe the person who was supposed to protect you became the person you learned to protect yourself from. And if that is your story, careless teaching about honor can sound less like wisdom and more like a command to walk back into the same situation where you were hurt. But several things need to be separated. Honor is not the same thing as trust. Trust can be damaged. Honor is not the same thing as reconciliation. Reconciliation involves realities that cannot always be produced by one person alone. And honor is not the same thing as unlimited access to your life. Distance and contempt are not identical. Boundaries and hatred are not identical. Sometimes wisdom requires stepping away from a destructive pattern. That does not automatically make the other person weightless. It means weight may need to be expressed differently. Perhaps you do not answer every demand. Perhaps certain conversations cannot continue. Perhaps there are doors that cannot safely remain open in the same way they once were. But even then, honor can still ask difficult questions. Can I refuse to let contempt become my identity? Can I speak truth about what happened without needing to reduce this person to nothing but what they did wrong? Can I leave judgment with God rather than spending the rest of my life trying to make them pay inside every conversation? Those questions should never be used to force someone to pretend that evil was acceptable. Biblical honor does not require calling darkness light. And there is another detail in Ephesians 6 that is easy to miss. Paul does not speak to children and then end the conversation. After addressing them, he turns toward fathers and gives them a command as well. They are not to provoke their children to anger, but to raise them in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. In other words, Scripture does not hand parents a commandment to quote while giving them no responsibility of their own. Authority itself is under God. Parents are accountable for what they do with it. That matters because honor your parents should never become a religious weapon used to protect destructive behavior from being named. The fifth commandment gives parents weight. It does not give them immunity. And that brings the scale back into balance. Do not make them nothing, but do not make them untouchable. Tell the truth, use wisdom, give the relationship whatever weight can rightly and safely be carried, and keep the greatest weight where it belongs, with God. But there is another mistake we could make. After hearing about boundaries, adulthood, and the right to say no, it would be easy to turn biblical honor into nothing more than an attitude, something private, something you feel, something that costs nothing. Jesus did not allow that interpretation. In Mark chapter 7, Jesus confronted religious teachers over a practice connected with the word Corban. Jesus reminded them of the responsibility to honor father and mother. Then he described resources that could have helped a parent being set apart under a religious designation instead. The parent was left without the benefit those resources could have provided. Jesus condemned the practice. Think about what that means. His complaint was not simply, "You should speak more respectfully." The failure had become practical. There was something that could have helped a father or mother, and it did not reach them. Religious language had created a way around responsibility. That tells us something enormous about biblical honor. Weight has consequences. If something truly carries weight in your life, eventually it appears somewhere you can see. It appears in your attention. It appears in the sacrifices you are willing to make. Sometimes it appears in money. Sometimes it appears in time. Sometimes it appears in a task nobody else wants to handle. The form changes from family to family. The principle does not. A person cannot remain important only in theory forever. At some point, importance becomes visible. And perhaps our modern version of the Corban problem is not always a single dramatic decision. Often, it is a long chain of reasonable delays. You plan to call next weekend, but the children have something scheduled. You mean to visit next month, but work becomes unusually busy. You tell yourself you will have more time after this project. Then another project arrives. None of those explanations is dishonest. That is what makes the pattern so difficult to notice. Every individual delay has a good reason. But 6 months later, you look back and realize that the relationship has been living almost entirely on the promise, when things calm down. And things never calm down. No single week looked like abandonment. But taken together, the weeks tell a story. Someone you say matters has been repeatedly moved behind everything else that matters. That is why this commandment cannot remain sentimental. Honor eventually has hands and feet. Paul makes the same principle practical when he speaks about families caring for their own. Children and grandchildren have responsibilities toward those who came before them. Not every family has the same money. Not every adult child lives nearby. Not everyone can provide the same kind of care. Honor cannot be measured by one universal dollar amount or number of visits, but it can still ask, does this person actually have weight in the way I arrange my life? And that question becomes especially powerful when parents grow older, because there comes a season when the relationship begins to reverse. The person who once drove you everywhere may no longer be able to drive. The person who once remembered everything may begin forgetting. The person who once carried you may eventually need to be carried. There is a season of life nobody explains very well. The parent who once knew what to do begins asking you what to do. The person who drove you to school may eventually hand you the keys. The person who remembered every appointment may begin forgetting the day. The person who once lifted you into bed may one day need help standing from a chair. And suddenly, honor is no longer theoretical. It becomes patience. It becomes time. It becomes paperwork. It becomes repeating an answer you already gave yesterday. It becomes making difficult decisions without stripping away the dignity of the person those decisions are about. That matters, because in the biblical world, growing old could leave a person extremely vulnerable. There was no modern retirement system waiting in the background. Family carried much of the responsibility. If adult children stopped caring, an aging parent could lose far more than companionship. They could lose security itself. That helps explain why Proverbs warns against despising your mother when she is old. Old age is where the temptation becomes stronger, not because an elderly parent has become less human, but because they may have become less useful by the standards we often use to measure people. They may move more slowly, produce less, need more, interrupt more. And that is exactly where the fifth commandment asks whether value and usefulness are the same thing. They are not. Leviticus gives Israel another striking image. It tells the people to rise in the presence of the aged. Honor becomes physical. You do something with your body because another person's age still deserves recognition. The point is not that every culture must copy one exact social gesture. The deeper point is that biblical respect refuses to remain invisible. It takes form. And perhaps the most moving example appears near the end of Jesus' life. While hanging on the cross, Jesus looked down and saw his mother. He then placed her care into the hands of the disciples standing nearby. John makes clear that from that moment forward, Mary would not be left without a household willing to receive responsibility for her. Think about the weight of that moment. Jesus is suffering. His own death is approaching. And yet his mother's future is not treated as a detail too small to matter. Her care is arranged. Her vulnerability is seen. Honor becomes responsibility. Not sentiment, responsibility. And for some people, this may be where the fifth commandment becomes hardest. Not when you are a child being told to obey, but when you are an adult trying to preserve the dignity of someone who is slowly losing the independence they once had. Anyone can say, I respect my parents. The harder question is whether they still feel substantial when caring for them costs you something. And that question leads directly to the promise attached to the commandment. After commanding Israel to honor father and mother, God attaches a promise connected with enjoying long days in the land he was giving them. That promise is sometimes heard like a private formula. Honor your parents, and God will add years to your life. Dishonor them, and he will take years away. But Scripture itself is more complicated than that. Faithful people sometimes die young. Unfaithful people sometimes live a very long time. So the promise cannot be reduced to simple arithmetic. The language of long days in the land belongs to the larger covenant story of Israel. It speaks about a people remaining established in the place God gave them. And suddenly, the fifth commandment makes sense on a much larger scale. What kind of society lasts? One where people matter only while they are productive? Or one where the weak, the aging, and the dependent still carry weight? Imagine a community where children watch their parents mock the elderly, where grandparents are treated like inconveniences, where the moment a person stops producing, their value begins to disappear. Those children are learning something. They are learning what will happen to them one day. They are learning that human worth has an expiration date. A society built on that lesson may look strong for a while, but something inside it is already breaking. Now imagine the opposite. Children see their parents care for grandparents. They see patience. They see sacrifice. They see an older person still consulted, still spoken to with dignity, still treated as someone who belongs. They are learning something too. They are learning that people do not become disposable when they become dependent. That kind of honor stabilizes more than one relationship. It shapes a culture, and now we can finally return to the scale. Too little weight says, my parents mean nothing. Too much weight says, my parents have the right to control what belongs to my conscience, my marriage, my adulthood, or my obedience to God. Proper weight says something different. They matter. Their words deserve consideration. Their dignity deserves protection. Their real needs deserve attention. But they are not God. That is the balance. Not weightless, not ultimate, properly weighted. So how do you know whether you are actually honoring your parents? Here are 4 questions that may help. First, am I making them weightless? When I disagree, do I still listen? When I talk about them, do I speak as though they are real people or only problems? Second, am I giving them weight that belongs somewhere else? Am I honoring them, or am I allowing fear, guilt, or pressure to hand them authority over decisions I am responsible to make before God? Third, is my honor visible? If I say my parents matter, can that be seen anywhere? In my time, my attention, my willingness to help, my speech, my patience? And fourth, can I tell the truth without contempt? This may be the hardest one. Can I say, what you did was wrong, without deciding that the person who did it is therefore nothing? Can I establish a boundary without making hatred the foundation of that boundary? Can I say no while still refusing to humiliate? Those 4 questions will not solve every family situation. Some relationships are simple, some are painfully complicated, but they force us to return to the question hidden inside the Hebrew image. What weight does this person actually have in my life? So what does honor your father and your mother actually mean? It is bigger than manners, and it is more careful than blind obedience. The Hebrew gives us a picture of weight. Give father and mother significance. Do not casually erase them. Do not treat them as disposable when they become inconvenient. Let their dignity matter. Let their needs matter. Let their words receive real consideration. But do not confuse weight with worship. Your parents are not God. Their approval is not your highest authority. Their desires do not automatically become your calling. And sometimes the most honorable answer you can give is a respectful no. Other times, honor may look very different. It may look like listening, a phone call, a ride to an appointment, a difficult conversation, a boundary, a meal, an afternoon you would rather have kept, or simply sitting beside someone who is no longer as strong as they once were and making sure they know one thing: you still count. That may be the deepest picture behind the commandment. Not pretending your parents are perfect, not pretending family wounds are unreal, not surrendering the place that belongs to God, but refusing to make father or mother weightless. So when you hear the 5th commandment again, remember the scale. Don't make them weightless. Don't make them God-sized. Give them their proper weight, because biblical honor is not about returning to childhood. It is about learning, as an adult, how to give another human being the significance God says they should have.